So, hello everyone. Welcome to our new module, right? And this one is sort of another entry, I guess, in the Office suite. A very important and I guess prominent one being PowerPoint, right? Um, so, if you didn't know already, PowerPoint is a application that allows us to create sort of engaging slideshows. Um, and honestly, in many corporate contexts, it is sort of a staple, or at least the notion of a slideshow, right? And the purpose, if we don't know, of sort of, I guess, a PowerPoint or by extension, any slideshow, is to take a wide amount of knowledge and to be able to somewhat condense it into bite-sized pieces that are sort of easier to understand. Prior to sort of the creation of PowerPoint, right, and these sorts of slideshow applications, um, a lot of sort of individuals, I believe, resorted to like I'm not sure what the term is, but like a light box, right, where you are able to sort of present or put a um, I guess, clear sheet of not paper, but some sort of clear sheet that resembles paper, and then you could draw on it or have sort of schematics on it and then have it uh, flashed onto the wall, right? However, the creation of sort of slideshow applications, especially with PowerPoint, particularly took off in many business contexts. Um, because of how easy they were to put together and sort of easy to share, right? And now they're practically staples in any office environment, just as Word is, right? And Excel is, PowerPoint is no different, right? Um, so, being this module, I did just want to explain the sort of setup or how it goes. Typically, I will sort of have um, how do I say this? Like I will have slides, right? We'll go through the slides. Then those slides I will also walk through sort of what I just discussed on the slides, show it in PowerPoint so you get sort of a demo there. And then so multiple times during the lesson, another thing I will do is sort of ask a question, right? And that question will typically be related to what we've discussed in the slides or what I've just shown, or it could just be like how do I say it's like a recall almost like, okay, if you remember, we discussed this earlier. How do we say insert a text box into our slide? So questions like that, where you get a little bit of time to um, think about it and then have your response in which I explain the answer. The purpose of that is primarily just to um, keep you engaged, right? Keep you on your toes, and also just a sort of a knowledge check, right? Another thing about this module is that we will also have sort of quote unquote let's try sections in which we'll be presented with, I guess, a problem, right? And the problem typically encompasses what we've covered in the sort of the past collection of slides, right? And we'll sort of work through it one by one, right? Depending on how long it does take to get through these slides, after I have sort of tried to set aside time for some like general walkthroughs. And what I mean by that is just going through and creating sort of example presentations for certain contexts just to really reinforce everything we've covered um, over the course of our module and whatnot. And also just as, again, as a knowledge check, right? All things considered, um, this module should not be too difficult. Um, I'm assuming that a decent bit of you have already used PowerPoint in some context, and if you have, that's completely fine. I'm sure you will still uh, find a lot to gain because even just apart from the basics of PowerPoint, there is a lot to learn and a lot of additional features that maybe you may not have sort of encountered or used before. However, for those that have not used PowerPoint, You don't need to worry either. This sort of module is structured so that we assume zero knowledge. Um, so even if you've never sort of used PowerPoint before and you don't know what it is, do not worry. Again, this course is sort of structured in a way to assume no knowledge, right? To go from 0 to 100 in the context of PowerPoint, right? Um, so yeah, getting into it, it's nothing too crazy. Um, of course, one thing I do mention is I encourage you to sort of follow along with our examples. Perhaps have a instance of PowerPoint opened up on your computer screen or whatever, just to follow along and sort of see the same things I do, right? And again, one thing mentioned, just going through these lectures, I don't think is enough. As they say, practice makes perfect. And for a lot of the things you'll learn in this course, that is especially true. So again, I would encourage you, right, on your own time to just like play around with PowerPoint, right, try new things, uh, and that because at the end of the day, I could talk to you for like 30 hours about a subject, but it may be harder for you to draw conclusions about what I've taught um, just off like my lectures. But if you go through um, and sort of work with the platform itself, you might find yourself learning a lot more that way or understanding the things I go over in class. But that said, don't worry, it shouldn't be anything too crazy. Uh, we are going to get pretty in depth with PowerPoint, and hopefully by the end of it, end of this module, you end up feeling very confident with PowerPoint. In that, if you're asked to do a certain thing in PowerPoint, you could definitely just say, "Hey, um, that's completely fine. I can do that. There's no issues there whatsoever." With all that said, that was a bit of a longer intro, but there were some things I did want to mention. We can get right into our slides. Okay, and I apologize for the sudden shift to orange to white. I know this could be blinding. I know my eyes are burning a little bit. Um, but we're talking about introduction to PowerPoint. So, in terms of what PowerPoint is, well, it is a presentation program that allows us to create dynamic slide presentations. These presentations can include things such as animation, narration, images, videos, and much more, right? So, one thing about PowerPoint is that it started off as a very simple application, right? Typically just creating a slide, maybe inserting a couple images, and then just inserting text, right? But over time, more and more functionality has sort of built in, which we will cover. So don't worry too much about that. But a lot of functionality has been built into sort of the platform that's only, I guess, increased its effectiveness, right? Say things such as animation. I'm sure you've seen a lot of animation in PowerPoint slides, like slide transitions, right? We also have narration, right? So if for whatever reason, maybe you want to do a pre-recorded lecture or maybe a demo for a product, right, that involves a slideshow, instead of having to present it live, what you could do is you can narrate over your slides and sort of use that, right? Then we have images and videos. As we know, images are sort of a very common entry um, in PowerPoint or slideshows, right? Like for example, a big sort of draw of PowerPoint, like back when it was first beginning, was the ability to place things such as say like charts into your slides, right? Um, and whatnot. Then we also have like videos again. If you ever need to contextualize something, a video is a good way to do that, right? And sort of PowerPoint is sort of really good at inserting videos into um, our slides, right? So all in all, that is to say, PowerPoint is something that's a pretty useful skill, I guess, to learn. It has sort of embedded itself significantly in the overall Office ecosystem. And by Office ecosystem, I'm not referring to Word currently. I'm just talking about in general, right? a lot of workplaces do have sort of a heavy reliance on PowerPoint for presentation in some way or another. One thing I did want to mention is that maybe your workplace doesn't use the Microsoft Suite and perhaps it uses, let's say, um, maybe something like Google, right? So Google Slides is maybe something your company uses because perhaps they use the Google ecosystem. One thing I want to note is even if that's sort of the case, that's completely fine, right? Well, why is that fine? It's because Google Slides functions extremely similarly to sort of the way that PowerPoint is, right? So with that, even if you do find more utility um, in using sort of Google Docs, say over something such as PowerPoint, you will still gain a lot from learning this course because a lot of those skills will carry over to Google Docs, right? So there's no need to generally worry about that. Now, with all that said, right, we're first beginning discussing the PowerPoint interface. So when we open PowerPoint for the first time, we'll get the start screen. Then from here, we'll be able to create a new presentation, choose a template, and access recently edited presentations, right? So from the start screen, if we want to sort of create a new blank presentation, we could go to the blank presentation tab, or that blank presentation, I guess, button, right? We see it right here. We could go and click this to access what we call the PowerPoint interface, right? Now, as I mentioned, we would have some sort of questions, right? So I guess the first thing, or the first question of our module is related to sort of templates, right? So I discussed templates, right? Like we could choose a template, right? Now, my question to you, and this is a little bit of a softball question, um, just to get started. It is a bit of an easier question, but what are templates, right? What value do we think templates provide to PowerPoint? So this is a question. We'll give it roughly 2 minutes ish for everyone to sort of pause, reflect, and really think about the answer to this question. And what I want you to do is have some sort of question or sorry, some sort of answer in your mind, right? By the end of the 2 minutes, again, it doesn't have to be anything super crazy, right? But I do just want you to have some sort of answer in your mind, and we'll come back in 2 minutes and sort of go over what the correct answer is. So we'll do that. Again, my question is, what is a template? And what sort of value might it provide a PowerPoint user in PowerPoint, right? What do we think? So again, we'll give it 2 minutes, right, to really think about that question, right? And hopefully we can sort of get some good answers formulated. What do we think, everyone? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? All right. We'll come back a little bit earlier, right? but let's discuss the template. Okay. So hopefully something I was looking along the lines, and if your answer doesn't match this exactly, that's completely fine. But a template is sort of a preset designed version of a set of slideshows that you could work off of, right? So if we get a blank presentation, right, the assumption is that we're working with a completely clean slate, so just a blank slide. Whereas if we choose something like a template, let's say like right here, this is an example of a template. I will show some other examples of a template. We're operating with this preset design for us, right? In terms of what value it offers us, well, I guess a core part is we don't want our PowerPoints to look boring, right? At the very least, we don't want it to look like sort of a just white block with text on it, right? That's not entirely pleasing, right? We want to be able to convey our thoughts in a manner that's palatable for the reader. And if we have nothing going on our slide, right, it's just white with black text, right, that's not particularly engaging, right? However, with the notion of templates, we have relatively engaging, I'd say, relatively engaging designs that have already been set for us, right? So we don't need to spend that time and labor sort of formulating a design, right? Implementing the design and making sure the design works for every type of slide, right? They've done it for us. All we need to do as a PowerPoint user, if we do choose to use templates, is select a template, right? And then simply just plug in our text, right? And all the adjustments would be made, right? Uh, a lot of people do use slide templates, and I would recommend it unless you are very, very passionate about design or you want your sort of, I guess, slideshows to look a certain way. You could definitely do that. In fact, this slideshow right here is operating off a template I like, where it's like a simple, minimalistic, yellow and or sorry, white and orange setup, and the font also changes in the template to make everything pop, right? But yeah, again, if you do enjoy making your own design, right, or you want your sort of slideshows to look a certain way, that's completely fine. You can create your own sort of slide setup. In fact, you can even create your own template, right? But for the majority of those that simply just want to be able to make their slideshow and be done with it, templates are a very great time-saving option. Another thing to mention, typically in a corporate environment, if you are asked to make a slideshow, more often than not, a lot of corporations will sort of have their own preset template that you'll typically be working off of. So that's another thing to mention. So let's just quickly tab out and let's go to PowerPoint, right? So let me see. Let's open a new tab. Let's start from scratch. Let's go here. Let's see if it gives us a start screen. So this is our start screen, right? This is different because I've already loaded in PowerPoint, as you can see. So let's just close this. And sorry about the odd formatting, right? But this is what our start screen looks like if you haven't used PowerPoint and you open it for the first time, or if you just open up your PowerPoint for the first time since you've turned on your computer, right? And now what we see is sort of a variety of options. We see home, new, open, right? So we see a bunch of things such as like say blank presentation, right? Which is what we want to click. We see our recent sort of slides. So these are slides I've opened. And as you can see, these are simply just slides I've opened, right? We have favorites shared with me, right? And then also we have sort of templates, right? They've changed the name to match themes, right? But as you can see, there are a lot more options than this, right? You can really search for whatever you want. Let's say education, and sort of PowerPoint will provide you with a wide variety of templates to sort of choose, right? And before I show you um, blank template, I just did want to show you what it looks like. So it downloads, right? And as you can see, there is sort of a style somewhat applied, right? And there is a font and font colors and all that, and we can click and edit it right? And it's just very, very plug and play, which for us is perfect, right? For many people, actually, it is perfect because it is straightforward. Now we can just create new blank presentation and we can immediately see the sort of the difference. So let me just close this. And now we can see it's immediately different. Um, a lot more bland, for sure. Um, not as engaging. Um, but, you know, it's there, right? It's a blank presentation. You get what you asked for in this context, right? Very, very plain, right? But that's how you create a new blank presentation. Um, if for whatever reason you need one, that's how you do it, right? And now we're going to break down sort of the user interface, right? And sort of one thing I'll mention is that typically, how do I say this? Like the Office suite, as we know, maybe you learned this in Word or Excel, um, does have a sort of different setup, right? Compared to most menus, right? What we'll see is with a lot of these sort of, I guess, productivity-esque applications, like let's just say this, let's say Photoshop, right? They all sort of, I guess, follow a similar design ethos in the way their menus look, right? And now, I guess the question is, right? Actually, let's explain it, right? So let's explain the different components, right? So we have the quick access toolbar, right? So I'm sure you've heard of this, but the quick access toolbar lets us access common commands no matter which tab is selected. We can customize the commands depending on our preference, right? So I'm not going to specifically point out which is what, because again, that's going to be part of our question, and I will just explain it. Right, but right now, I'm just explaining what these sort of components are, right? So now we're talking about the ribbon. So the ribbon contains all the commands we'll need to perform common tasks in PowerPoint. It has multiple tabs, each with several groups of commands, right? That's the ribbon. Now, in my question that I will ask soon, the tell me bar is not included because there has been a modification to where to what the tell me bar is, right? But the tell me bar works like a search bar to help us find tools or commands you want quickly, right? So I will ask a couple questions here, right? I guess the first question is, and we'll give it 2.5 minutes, where do we think the quick access toolbar is, and where do we think the ribbon is, everyone? So this is another question to get your mind thinking, and given this image, right, that we have in front of us on this slide, on the right side of this slide, where do you think the quick access toolbar is, and where do we think the ribbon is? So that's another question. Let's give it 2.5 minutes, I'd say, give or take. Where do we think the quick access toolbar would be, and where do we think the ribbon would be, everyone? What do we think? What do we think? Where would it be? And this is just to give you a better view of the slide so you can really think and you're not distracted by like any sort of webcam in the bottom corner, right? Also, sometimes the camera cuts off some text, so I turn it off so you can see the full slide. Um, but what do we think? Where do we think the quick access toolbar is? And where do we think the ribbon is? Where would they be located? What do we think, everyone? All right, let's come back. Hopefully we formulated some answers. If not, I completely understand, especially if you haven't worked with PowerPoint before, right? Um, but in terms of quick access toolbar, that's this sort of thing here, right? That's this. So we could add commands here, right? That, okay, let's say we need a command. We can quickly access it up here, right? We don't have to go through the menus or have to sort of spend more time. We know certain commands that we set will be saved up here. Typically, we will mention that the quick access toolbar by default has a couple of commands that are usually always there unless you take them off, right? We will touch on those, right? As well as sort of go over the other sort of list of commands um, that are there for you, right? Again, it's just for speed, right? So one thing you'll probably notice when you're looking at the quick access toolbar up here is that it's always in vision, right? You can always see those commands, and that doesn't change it even if you change like these tabs here. You select another one, the quick access toolbar will remain at the top, right? So it gives you a good, I guess, sort of understanding of where stuff is, right? You always know it's there. Right, finally, we have the ribbon. So the ribbon contains all of our commands, and we will go into the ribbon in depth, right? I will try to exhaust most of it because this is sort of the bread and butter in PowerPoint. A lot of the things you do will be done in the ribbon for PowerPoint, right? So it is something that I believe is like arguably the most important thing to learn when discussing PowerPoint because it legitimately is sort of the bread and butter of PowerPoint, right? And basically, the reason why, if you're wondering, like, why is he sort of playing up this feature so much? Well, it's because the ribbon contains all the commands we'll need to sort of perform common tasks in PowerPoint, right? It has multiple tabs. As we can see here, this is what they mean by tabs, right? And as you can see, if we're clicked into a tab, we have sort of a wide variety of different commands, right? And that's no different with any of these. They have sort of commands for their respective purpose, right? So now, I guess the question is, if we have a bunch of commands, right? Um, why even organize it like this, right? Why do it the way they did it, where everything's organized in tabs, right? And then each tab has a whole set of commands. Why don't they use something like a traditional menu? Why do we want to use something like this, like the ribbon system, everyone? So this is another question. In fact, this is a bigger, I guess this is a smaller question. Again, we'll give it 2 minutes to really think about. But why do we think they sort of use this ribbon-based system for navigation as opposed to, say, maybe a regular menu or perhaps a different way of doing so? Everyone, what do we think? What do we think? Why would sort of the developers of PowerPoint and the design team, why would they choose to go with sort of a ribbon design system as opposed to something more traditional like a menu, right? What do we think? Why use the ribbon system? Why would the developers actively make the choice to go with sort of the ribbon-based system for navigation of sort of commands and whatnot? What do we think? All right, and we're back. Right. So in terms of the why, let's answer this. Well, it's because it's a more efficient and organized system, right? So why? Why is it more organized, right? Why is it more efficient? Well, okay, first off, if we create something like a traditional menu where you click on the menu button and it opens up, with how many commands that say PowerPoint or even in Word or Excel, with how many commands they have, it can be easy to get for a user to get overwhelmed, right? It's also much harder to find what they're specifically looking for, right? Especially in sort of a wide list of the commands, even if it's categorized, your eyes visually, right? Let's say the menu takes up the whole page and you have sort of categories like home, insert, design, and you just have a bunch of text going down. That's very hard to find, right? Whereas this ribbon-based system is a lot easier. Well, why is it a lot easier, right? Well, it's a lot easier because um, we have sort of visual traits and everything is grouped in sort of a common grouping, right? So as opposed to it just being text, we have sort of visual cues. So here we have like a new slide button, right? Here we also have further distinctions, like, okay, this right here has sort of icons that as we sort of work with the platform more, we'll begin to understand what they mean, right? And then we can sort of create that quick mental map or mental sort of link with that sort of thing. Then again, as I mentioned, everything's individually categorized, right? So in the home tab, we have sort of a section related to slides, right? So commands related to slides, even font here, right? And we can sort of change the font, right? Bold, italicized, underline, like paragraph, right? So it really makes it much easier for a user to sort of do it this way because they don't have to spend a lot of time digging through, um, commands in a whole menu and scrolling up, scrolling down, that sort of thing. It's very easy to get lost. Whereas sort of in this ribbon system, we can quickly just make that association to what we need and sort of get to the option. For example, let's give an example. Let's say I want to insert an image, right, into my PowerPoint, right? Sure, common thing to do, but for whatever reason you don't know how to do it. Well, you'd think to yourself, well, which tab would it be in the ribbon? Well, obviously it might be in the insert tab, right? Intuitively, because we want to insert an image. Then when we click on that, we'll probably see a scroll similar to this, and then we can go click on insert image and then follow the steps to insert an image, right? So that is to say, to answer that question in a very simple format, why did Microsoft choose to encourage or use that PowerPoint or encourage or use the ribbon system? It's because A, it's quick, it's efficient, and it's very organized for the user. It makes it easier to navigate a lot of the features they want. Finally, as we mentioned, and I've sort of ignored while talking about the quick access toolbar, the quick access toolbar and the ribbon is sort of the tell me box, right? So this is one of those things that has changed its appearance over the years, right? This image is from an earlier version of PowerPoint, right? And the tell me feature, as it says, is sort of a search bar to help quickly find tools or commands we want to sort of use. Before it used to be found here, right? So we can click on this, but now they've arguably put it, in my opinion, a much better location, much easier to sort of understand and pretty straightforward, right? And that's also one thing I didn't really mention at the beginning. Generally, 90% of what I discuss, I'd say 95, discuss in today's class related to sort of PowerPoint you could theoretically do on even an older version of PowerPoint or even a new version of PowerPoint. That is to say that PowerPoint does not change much in the grand scheme of things, right? A lot of the principles that were applicable 20 years ago are still applicable now, right? What has only changed is possibly the way that sort of the application looks, along with the addition of new features, right? But this is one of those rare instances where that feature has been slightly fundamentally changed in terms of design and position, not in sort of function, right? So let me just show that. So let's go back to our slide here, right? And this is the new position of what I call the tell me bar. So this is sort of the search bar, and we can just search whatever we want. So let's just go new slide, and it will bring us the best action, right? So new slide. Okay, cool. Now, ultimately, seeing sort of the new, I guess, layout of PowerPoint. So again, we have our quick access toolbar, we have our ribbon and our tell me feature, right? Seeing all this, why do we think the tell me feature is so important now? What does it help the user with? We'll give it, again, another 2 minutes, but what do we think? Why is this so useful and so helpful to a PowerPoint user, everyone? What do we think? What do we think about the tell me bar, everyone? What do we think? Why is it so important, and why is it so useful for the user to have access to it? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? Right? Okay, cool. So I did give a little bit more time because I want you to really think about it. And if I were to give you a quick answer, I know I've been very rambly with my answers, but I do want to make sure I come across clearly, right? The purpose of this is, again, just to speed up I guess, to make it easier, to make your sort of the user faster at using the application, right? Let's say we need to do something um, that we don't know where it lies in the ribbon, right? Or we kind of forget, whatever. Well, what could a user do? Could they, theoretically sit here, go through every single tab, right? And just look for it manually? Sure, they could. Or they could use the tell me feature. So let's just look for an obscure feature here. Uh, hmm. Let's just go spelling, right? Say you want a spelling check, right? Oh, you could find the review tab and go there. Sure, that's fine. Completely fine. Or, alternatively, you can just go spelling, click enter, or click on it and open it, and there you go. Very, very fast, right? So again, it just makes it easier to find certain things, right? So in this case, like finding like features or whatever, it sort of speeds up the process. Even if you know that, okay, it's held in the review tab, if it's quicker for you to sort of use the tell me feature to sort of search it up, and apply it, you can go ahead and do that. So it's there for efficiency's sake and organization, and it's especially useful when a user, how do I say this? Like, it's especially useful when a user doesn't know where they need to navigate, right? They could just go to tell me bar, quickly search it up, select it, enter, there you go, right? So one thing we're realizing most likely is that a lot of the sort of say the quick access toolbar, which we will elaborate on, same thing with the ribbon, right? Along with the tell me bar, a lot of this is sort of created for convenience, speed, efficiency, right? Easy to navigate. It's potentially a big reason why a lot of individuals like PowerPoint. Not so much anymore, since a lot of, say, applications similar to this use a similar sort of flow. But again, it's just very easy to use, very convenient. Everything is in front of you, right? It makes it much, much easier to create what you need to, right? And yeah, so that's sort of I guess, an intro to quick access toolbars, ribbons, right? And tell me, uh, we will be moving on to elaborate more on these features now. All right, so now we're still going on about sort of the PowerPoint user interface, and naturally so, we do want to learn how to navigate PowerPoint, primarily because it's so important to know where everything is, how everything is situated, because as we start to get more and more practice with PowerPoint, um, we start to get much faster and more efficient with how we use the application, right? So we did discuss sort of the quick access toolbar, the tell me bar, and the ribbon, right? Now we're going to be talking a little bit more about the overarching application as opposed to just sort of, I guess, the menu and navigation system, because that's what sort of the tell me bar, the quick access toolbar, and the ribbon sort of did, right? So first, we can talk about the Microsoft account, right? So from here, we can access our Microsoft account information, view your profile, and switch accounts, right? So essentially, to use any Office Suite product, um, it is connected to sort of a Microsoft account, right? Um, and that's where majority of our sort of application is connected to, right? And now, without providing more context on sort of the Microsoft account side, and just mentioned, or in just thinking about sort of Excel, Word, and PowerPoint, why do you think Microsoft structured in such a way that all these applications like OneDrive, PowerPoint, Excel, Word, why do we think all these applications are sort of or should be linked to one Microsoft account? Why do we think that is, everyone? We'll give 2 minutes for this question, but why do we think Microsoft structured sort of Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and the whole Office suite for that matter? Why do you think they structured it in such a manner that you would need to be using a Microsoft account? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? We'll give it 2 minutes. What do we think, everyone? What do we think? Surely there are a lot of reasons, but there might be a specific reason, right, that might be coming to mind more so, right? And what do we think that is? What do we think? Okay, so let's discuss it. Well, sort of the overarching goal, I guess, from Microsoft was to create a all-in-one, I guess, system linked to your Microsoft account, right? Now that's the business perspective, right? The biggest business perspective absolutely makes sense to sort of integrate all of these Office applications with our Microsoft account. Now, if we're talking about the user perspective, well, the user perspective sort of creates a ecosystem where users can sort of have every single one of their important applications sort of consolidated into one general service, right? For example, like let's say any PowerPoints, Word documents, whatever, we can save them to our OneDrive, right? And because we can save them to our OneDrive, we are able to access them anywhere, right? They're available online anytime, right? So just for easy use, right, it is linked um, to sort of a central Microsoft account, right? Just to create and facilitate that Microsoft ecosystem, right? Because it has been designed in a way such that like every application works together very, very well, right? Um, and it just makes sort of Microsoft have the all-in-one package, right? For any sort of productivity or work related item, right? So that's another thing, right? So we have the ruler, right? And the ruler is located at the top and to the left of our current slide. That makes it easy to sort of align text and objects on our slides. That's another thing. Um, you may have it disabled. So this is our ruler, right? Helps us sort of dictate sizing. If we remember when we were working in Word, we could use it to sort of create indents and whatnot, right? And it also does help with sizing. But there might be, for some people, the ruler may not be present initially, right? And I know this was also mentioned in the Word unit, but there is a way um, to sort of make sure that the ruler sort of does appear, right? Now the question is, everyone, how do we make the ruler appear? Um, I'll give it 2.5 minutes for this one, maybe 2 minutes, right? Because it has probably been a while since you've last covered Word. But how do you think we enable or disable the ruler, right? And the purpose is, like, obviously we see that the ruler is here, but I do just want to illustrate if an individual does not see the ruler, how they could go about turning it on or off, right? Now, everyone, let's give it 2 minutes. Think about it. How do we enable the ruler? Does anyone remember how we could go about enabling the ruler, or does anyone know? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? Do we remember how to turn on the ruler? Okay, let's come back. So if we remember, we could go to the View tab, and then we see this ruler option. So we can select it. So you may see this, right? And if you want to open the ruler, you go to View, go to Ruler, and just click on that check mark, and it will appear. And if you want to turn it off, same thing, right? So that's a ruler. And it does, again, as we remember in Word, it was really, really good for aligning text, but especially in PowerPoint, we can also align certain objects on our slide if we are very, very sort of particular on about how we want things organized on our slide. That's something we can definitely do, right? And then here is sort of the slide pane, right? Right here. And this is how we can view and just edit the selected slide. So let's just go here, right? So this is the slide pane, so we can edit, sort of select a slide, whatever, and say this is a slide. You see, the slide pane allows us to sort of make changes or make edits to sort of our our slideshow, right? So that's that in terms of these sets of commands were pretty, I guess, straightforward, easy to understand, I'd say. Nothing too crazy. Now we can talk about the slide navigation pane. So the slide navigation pane allows us to view and organize the slides in our presentation, right? So let's just quickly just create some slides, right? And then basically we can navigate to different slides, right? Very essential feature, I'd say. Typically for most individuals, they won't minimize this, but it is very useful for navigating through the slides and quickly tabbing to them to make changes, right? It's also in this, sorry for the typing sound, but it's also in this tab in which we could simply just I guess, like organize it, right? So if we right click, we can do things such as new slide, duplicate slide, delete slide, add section, change layout, format the background, also shift and organize the order. Like let's say we want to make sure slide 5 is in between 2 and 3. We can go ahead and do that just by clicking and dragging. Of course, these are things that we will cover in depth as well. Don't worry, right? But this is, of course, just a cursory look, right? Then we have the vertical and horizontal scroll bars. These are pretty self-explanatory. They allow us to scroll up or down, side to side, right? We just need to click the vertical or horizontal scroll bar, right? And then we also have the slide number indicator, in which we can quickly see the total number of slides in our presentation along with the slide we're viewing. So again, the notion of scroll bars, we don't have a since we're zoomed adequately, right? We don't have sort of a horizontal scroll bar, right? But we do see this sort of like vertical scroll bar here. Then also we see the slide number right here, just telling us which slide we're on and how many slides we have total, right? Which is pretty easy to understand, I'd say, but honestly a pretty essential feature, especially if we're working with a slide limit, or we just want to know how many slides we've created or which slide we're working on, that sort of thing, right? All right, well, moving on. All right, everyone, we're sort of back with, I guess, a continuation of the PowerPoint user interface, right? Or at least the components of it. So we have covered like things such as like quick access toolbars, the ribbon tell me bar, right? Along with sort of the slide pane, scroll bars, ruler, all of that, right? And continuing in that same vein, we're sort of going through another three, I guess, components, right? And one of the first ones for today is sort of the comments, right? So comments are made such that any reviewers can leave comments on the slide. So by clicking on this button, you could see sort of comments for the current slide, right? Now, I guess the question is, what's generally the point of this? What does the comments feature sort of help with to a user? Like, why is that useful? I mean, we're just a slideshow application, right? Why would sort of the ability to add comments, why is that so important, right? So that's just a question I want you to think about for the next, like, I guess, minute 30. We'll keep it really quick. But what are sort of the possible application, or what is the possible application of having sort of the a comments feature on our slideshow, right? Like, what's the purpose, right? And to some, it may be entirely obvious. To others, maybe not as intuitive. Regardless of which camp you fall into, I do want you to think about this, right? Because it does shed some sort of insight on, um, I guess, the use of sort of, say, something like PowerPoint in the workplace, right? So let's give it a minute and a half for that question. And again, the question is, what sort of situation or what sort of value does the ability to add comments add to an to a slideshow application such as PowerPoint? What do we think, everyone? As I mentioned, to some, it might be something that appears relatively straightforward. To others, it might be something that, doesn't really occur to them as to why. And again, regardless of which camp you fall in, I really just want you to think about it. What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? Well, the answer simply is collaboration, right? Um, so I guess in the context of a workplace or even for school or even for private context, right? The sort of notion of comments implies that there's some sort of connectivity between others, right? And that is correct. Basically, um, in most Microsoft, I believe, applications like Word, Excel, you do have the ability to collaborate with others through OneDrive and your Microsoft account. So if you're wondering, well, why do we link a Microsoft account? That's a reason as well, right? So integration. And what we can do, let's say in a work context, we can share sort of the slideshow with our colleagues and they can work on it with us, along with sort of passing their comments in as well, right? So that's essentially why the comment section is there. It's for context in which you're collaborating with others, let's say in a work context, a school context, that sort of thing, right? Um, and honestly, you might be wondering, okay, but what's the point, right? Um, they could just message me, right? Or they could contact me, or we could just discuss it together. That is true, but this sort of makes collaboration much easier, right? I'm just thinking of an example. Let's say two individuals work on separate schedules, right, or available at certain times. Well, they may not have time to sort of get together and discuss changes to their slides. So the individual reviewing can leave a comment to leave feedback and to make changes based uh, on what they like, they don't like, those sorts of issues, right? It is one of those things that to a regular person who doesn't use it as much in a school or work context, it might be entirely useless, which is fair. But to those, say, are working with a company in which they need to collaborate with their team members, or even, say, school, if you're working on a group project, um, it is something that is very important and honestly very helpful, right? So we can find the comments tab right here. So allow me to tab back, right? And basically, I believe this is a feature that has sort of moved. I believe it's in review, and then you could click show comments, right? And it'll open the comments pane, right? Unless maybe I'm missing it. Mike's kind of blocking my. Yeah, so we just go to review tab. So it's not so much there, but again, the comments pane is something worth considering, right? Because it is that much helpful, right? It also could be because this isn't linked to a OneDrive. and we haven't shared it yet, right? But if we go here, we can show comments, and that sort of emphasizes the importance of that. Now we have slide view options. So this is basically separate ways to sort of view our presentation, right? And we just need to click a command to select the desired view. Now, if this sounds familiar to you, it's probably because it is. Both Word and Excel have similar sort of features to be able to change the way, I guess the best term that applies to all these would be document. So to change the way you view your document, right? Again, sort of PowerPoint is no different. And along the bottom of our screen, we do have 4 sort of different views that change the way our sort of slideshow appears. So let's just look at that now, right? So if I go here, cool, right? This is the view. So this is a normal view, right? This is what we see. This is what we're fairly accustomed to, right? But now we have slide sorter. So what slide sorter does is it has a view in which we're sort of zoomed out, very zoomed out, and we can see all of our individual slides. Now, allow me, that possibly, like you might be like, okay, well, I don't get it. Let me create more slides. And let's just go first. Let's just add a 1. Let's keep it simple. Let's keep it quick. So to an extent, you can sort of see the numbers. Now if we switch, look at that, right? So this probably gives you a better idea of how the slide sorter works. So we can see sort of a zoomed out version of all of our slides, right? And of course we can sort of rearrange if we need to, but this is the main sort of appeal or attraction of the slide sorter view. Now we have this. Now if we were to guess the reading view, everyone, what do we think the reading view does? Let's think about it for 30 seconds, right? What do we think the point of the reading view is? What do we think it does for us as a user? What do we think, everyone? Right? Well, if we click on it, we'll see that our slides open like this. So if this sort of view sounds familiar, it's because it is. We did cover this when we were working with Word, right? And basically it just, in Word, it sort of opened up your pages like a book, right? So page 1, page 2 would, I guess this would be a better way, would be viewed like this, like page, oh, it's flipped. So page 1, page 2. That's how it was with Word. That's how it kind of is in PowerPoint, in which each slide is considered a page, and it's really just zoomed in and showing it to you like this, right? Very, very similar to a book, right? And then if we go here, this is what we call presenter view. So this will sort of just go full screen, right? This is what we'll typically use to present our slides. So we'll just see our slides, right? We can skip through, everything's full screen. This is what we use when we're typically gonna present, right? But where is the, okay, cool. If we want to escape this, press escape, and then we get back to normal. And for the sake of changing, we can just go back to normal, right? So, and this is back. And again, the normal sort of look is probably the most prominent, I'd say. The very common, like if you're using PowerPoint, you're probably going to end up using the normal view anyways. And this is probably what you're going to be most familiar with. But again, it is worth mentioning the other views, primarily because like it's just one of those things where it's like a knowledge check where sure you may not use it, but the fact that you know it is sort of there is particularly important in case you find yourself in a situation where you do need any of the separate views. And I could argue that even, our slide sorter view, just very useful, especially if you have a lot of slides for the sake of organization and whatnot, just really dissecting and understanding how that sort of is, right? But let's switch back and move back to our slide. Finally, we do have the zoom control. So we can click and drag our slider to use the zoom control. Obviously, we've probably worked with the zoom slider in sort of Word or Power or Excel before, and it works just by clicking and dragging, and it changes the zoom percentage. So by default, we should be at 100, right? And then if we increase it, it does zoom in the slide pane, right? Pretty self-explanatory here. You can click and drag. So minus, zoom in, keep it equal here, and then you can also just increase and decrease, right? And don't do it by denominations, right? So that's cool and all. A lot of important features there, whether you use them or not, is completely up to you, but it is worth mentioning. Now we're discussing the ribbon. So, as we had mentioned earlier, the ribbon does use sort of a tabbed ribbon, or PowerPoint uses a tabbed ribbon system instead of traditional menus. The ribbon contains multiple tabs, each with sort of several groups of their own sort of commands, and they're somewhat, I guess, thematically linked, right? Or I guess purpose-based linked, right? For example, like the font group on our home tab does contain commands for formatting text in our document, right? And some groups do have sort of a small arrow in the bottom right corner that we can click for more options, right? So let's take a look at that, right? So that is to say that, okay, like if we're looking at our sort of ribbon, what's in front of us up here is not all we have. There are sort of additional settings we can apply. So if we click here, right, we'll be able to see increased settings or some different settings, right, that may not be present here, right? A lot of the main operations will be here anyways, but it does give us the option, let's say even paragraph, with alignment and having more controls, tabs, and all that, right? Very, very helpful. So we can skip past this. This isn't particularly relevant. This is one of those features where they've actually removed it, right? So we don't really need to discuss this. However, I will leave it in the slides in case you wanted, in case you are working with a smaller, sorry, not smaller, an older version of PowerPoint, right? Because this might be particularly helpful to you. But the TLDR, or sort of the long and short of it, is that sort of we could hide the ribbon, right? So you can work in full screen mode, right? And it sort of keeps it tucked away until you sort of click on the button to bring it back, right? And we have the ability to show tabs. So basically what show tabs does, if I am to show you, it will show these up here, but it won't show the menus unless you click on it. So these will drop down, right? And then we can show tabs and commands, which is sort of the default view. It'll show everything, right? So we see the tabs, right? And the individual commands associated with that tab. So now we're talking about the Tell Me feature, right? So before we get into the Tell Me feature, why do we think this feature came to be? And obviously it does look different. But if we were to guess, what's a possible sort of reasoning as to why sort of Microsoft decided to implement the Tell Me feature, right? Because we know it's essentially a search bar for sort of commands and operations. But why do you think they implemented this? And one thing I will note is that with a lot of changes in sort of design and like, I guess the steps you need to take to do a certain operation in any app, most of that process is thought through with a particular sense of detail, right, and foresight. And a lot of it is sort of created to solve a certain problem for a certain reason. Now the question is, what issue or problem do we think the Tell Me bar sort of solves in PowerPoint? What do we think, everyone? We'll give this 2 minutes. But what do you think is the reason why the Tell Me bar exists in PowerPoint, everyone? What do we think? What do we think? Why? What's the point of it? Like, why do you think Microsoft would decide to develop and add the functionality of sort of the Tell Me feature? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? All right. So, well, why do we think they implemented? Hopefully, when you thought of a response, you thought that it's to sort of condense the overall complexity and reduce the overall complexity in PowerPoint, right? Which would be, I think, the primary reason why it's there, right? Um, because as we can see with sort of the ribbon, it's a great working system, but unfortunately, PowerPoint does have a lot of sort of, I guess, like commands, right? It's overwhelmingly so, right? Because if we just totally just do a quick tally count here, we'll go 4, 8, uh, 13, 17, 21, 22, and that's in this half, right? And then all these across however many tabs there are, it does add up, right? However, by including a sort of tell me or search bar here at the top, we effectively reduce a lot of that ambiguity and a lot of that time wasted sort of time wasted navigating the menus by simply having the user sort of just search it up, right? So we can just go shapes, or that's the wrong one, but let's just go shape, right? Shape, and then, right? And we can click, oh wow, we can create a shape now, right? So the long and skinny, the tell me bar is super, super important because again, it just reduces the overall complexity and also improves efficiency, right? Because now, as opposed to having to dig through most menus, a user could theoretically just search for the feature they're looking for and sort of apply it without wasting too much of their sort of time, right? Especially in an office context, speed is of the essence. So being able to sort of get your work done quicker is always better. So again, if we're having trouble finding a command we want, the Tell Me feature can help. It works like a regular search bar, so you simply would just type what you're looking for, and a list of options will appear. We can then use the command directly from the menu without having to find it on sort of the ribbon. Right? Moving on. Okay. Now we're talking about the quick access toolbar, right? So located above the ribbon, the quick access toolbar lets you access common commands no matter which tab is sort of selected. By default, it includes save, undo, redo, and start from beginning, right? But we can add other commands based on our preference, right? And to add commands, all we need to do is we see this drop down arrow here where that mouse is on the top image, right? And we click on it to sort of get the quick access toolbar. Then we select the command we want to add from the drop down menu, and if what we're looking for isn't in that sort of list of commands, we can go to more commands. And once we select one, it will automatically appear on sort of our quick access toolbar, right? So let's take a look here. Right, so we can already see like save, undo, redo, and then present. But if we click on this, we could add things like new, open, email, quick print, print preview, spelling, touch, and mouse mode, right? We can quickly sort of add those up here. If we ever want to be able to sort of access them quickly or we use them often enough to where we need them in our constant vision, right? That's why it's there, right? So say you are someone who constantly works on PowerPoints and you need to constantly keep opening sort of new ones. You could click add the open one, right? So as you can see, once we clicked on open, open appended itself to our quick access toolbar. Now let's say theoretically, I'm working on my slideshow. This is a new slideshow, once I finish this slide, I am done with work, right? So, okay, cool, I made these changes. Now I need to open another file, right? Or another PowerPoint. I can click on this, and then it'll open up the open tab, right? And then I can select sort of a slide, right? And then this will pull up a new slide, right? So it's that very reason why we could sort of, we add the quick access toolbar just for insanely quick access to a set of certain features, right? That essentially gets us very, very far and sort of optimizes our processes, right? Also, if we click more commands, we have a wide list of commands. And this is just the popular. So bear with me. Let's go to all commands, right? So all commands, yeah. And we go and look, wow, all these sorts of things are available to add to the quick access toolbar. Look, it's insane. Like the scroll is not stopping, right? So it also like that amount of sort of selection and variety in commands ensures that to an extent we can find whatever we need command wise, which I think is very, very important, right? Because obviously PowerPoint people use it in a lot of different ways and for a lot of different sort of things. So having the ability for a user to have sort of full flexibility in what they want to add up there is frankly very, very, very huge, right? As you could probably tell or assume, right? So we discussed this, let's move on. Now we're talking about rulers. So PowerPoint does include several tools to help us organize and arrange content on our slides, including the ruler, guides, and grid lines. And these tools make it easier to sort of align objects onto our slides. All we need to do, again, as I mentioned, we go to View, right? The View tab, and we go to Ruler, and we can check or uncheck it, right? And PowerPoint does have a variety of viewing options that change how your presentation is sort of displayed. We can choose to view our presentation, and we went over this, right? We can choose how to view our presentation, whether that's normal view, slide sorter view, reading view, or slideshow view. And we can zoom in and out and make our presentation easier to read. As I had mentioned earlier, if we want to switch our slide views, right, it's pretty easy. We can just locate and select the desired view or slide view command in the bottom right corner of the PowerPoint and sort of click on it, and our slide view will change accordingly, right? And again, normal view, right? That's your typical PowerPoint view, the one you're most likely accustomed to if you have worked with it before, and the one you probably use most often. Then we have sort of the slide sorter view, which is sort of like a high level, I guess, view of all the slides you created, zoomed out. All right, we have reading view again, sort of formats it like a book. You're just looking at each slide, and then we have presenter view, which is what it looks like when we're presenting, right? Then of course, to zoom in and out, as we mentioned, we can click and drag the zoom control slider, right? Or we can press the plus or minus commands to zoom in or out of smaller increments. And the number next to the slider displays the current zoom percentage, also what we call the zoom level. Now, there are a couple terms that are also very, very important. Not terms. There is a term that's very, very important and you'll hear a lot of, right? And that's the backstage view. So the backstage view gives us various options for saving, opening, printing, and sharing our presentation. To access the backstage view, we sort of click the File tab on the ribbon. Now, it's time for a question. Let's give it another 2 minutes, but I know you may have possibly seen it already. But what sorts of features, if we do we think we'd be able to find in the backstage view once we click on our File tab? And if you're confused as to how this is question, think about the fact that we have to click on the File tab on our ribbon. Given that, what sort of commands do you think we could find in our File tab, everyone? What do we think? Let's take some guesses. Let's give it 2 minutes, or let's give it 2 minutes to really think about. But what sorts of commands do we think we can find in the backstage view? And the hint for that question is think about what sort of commands could be, what category of commands could be found in the File tab, everyone? What do we think? Again, give it a try, really think about it, whether you know it or not. If you don't know it, that's completely fine. Just try to think about it, right? And if you do know it, again, try to think about it, right? But why do we think? What sorts of commands do we think are present in the File tab? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? Okay, so if you guessed sort of commands, a wide range of commands relating to your current file, such as things to modify your file and sort of share it or export it, you would be correct. And even if you didn't get that sort of response, don't worry. It was specifically meant to be a tricky question, right? Like I didn't expect, like if you didn't get the response, I wouldn't be surprised, right? Because it is an odd-ish question and it was framed really weird. But that said, the backstage view gives us various options for sort of saving, opening, printing, and sharing our presentations. again, we click on the File tab on the ribbon to access them, right? So let's discuss this, and then I'll show you everything there. And then, so we can go back to PowerPoint with this button. So by clicking this arrow, we can close our Backstage view and come back to PowerPoint, right? And Backstage view is, I think, one of the only tabs on the ribbon that sort of takes you to another page, right? So that's a little bit of trivia there for you should you need it. And finally, we also have the info pane. So whenever we go to the Backstage view, the first thing we'll see is sort of the info pane, and this contains information about the current presentation. So let's look at this, right? So we go here, File, right? And we sort of see a lot, right? So in the home page, right, we see like new files, so like a blank presentation along with some templates. Then we also see our recent slideshows. Sorry, I was blanking. Our recent slideshows here, right? We can click on the new button for, I guess, more templates along with blank presentation. We can open new sort of or pre-existing PowerPoint files as well here in the Open tab. Then we have sort of the Share, which if we link with this is just an account I've created for demos, maybe you've seen it in the Outlook unit, but this is how we can share our presentation. Obviously, you do need to upload it to OneDrive first, right? But once it's shared to OneDrive, you could, give someone access to it via a link, or even just sharing directly from OneDrive, right? Or you could also download it as a PowerPoint presentation or a PDF, right? Which we could also do in other tabs here that I'll show. Then here's the info tab. So we could we'll discuss these, right? But we can, I guess, change the permissions on this protect presentation tab, so we can make it read only to open with. We can encrypt it with a password. We can restrict access, add a digital signature, or mark as final. We can check for issues, say like sensitive information or whatever, if we're going to be publishing it online. Version history shows us, like, I guess, changes made to our PowerPoint, right? That sort of thing. And then obviously we see more information here, right? Like created, da da da. And then we have save. So we'll go over these, right? But save options, we can print, which we will also go in depth about. We can also sort of export as well, which I believe we go into, but different ways to export our PowerPoint, right? So we can change it. We can close it here, or we can go back to this arrow to go back to our slideshow, and then we have the account and options, which are pretty self-explanatory. So sort of options related to the account, right? That creates it, and the options related to just PowerPoint in general. And then we can go back. So that's a file tab. It's one of those things where a lot of individuals do end up using it without really thinking of it. It's really a thankless feature, right? But I do feel like it's worth mentioning just generally, just to go over it, right? Despite the fact that, a lot of individuals may already know how to use sort of, how to use the file tab, right? Because the process is generally very similar in any similar application like Word, like Excel, Google Docs, that sort of thing. All right, well, moving on to our Let's Try section. All right, so now we're doing our first Let's Try section, right? And I will add a little bit more time on this process, I think, today, only because I want to condition everyone that sort of maybe hasn't encountered it yet. But basically, we have a set of tasks we can do. And I don't show you this slide. I'll show you it for the explanation, right? But basically, it's just a step-by-step process or a step-by-step practice problem over what we just covered, right? Now, none of these are explicitly difficult, I think, but they are good sort of practices and exercises for you to follow along with because they do make the process much, much easier to learn. And you can also understand what you know, what you don't know, that sort of thing, right? So, what I typically do is I will typically escape out of this. Um, so, I move this out, right? And then basically, I go through the slides and I ask you to do it. Now, as I had mentioned, I would prefer if you follow along, right? So if you have PowerPoint in front of you, to try to attempt this yourself as well. Again, just to build that intuition and knowledge. But even if you don't follow along, one thing I want you to do in these let's try sections is to sort of at least think about it critically, right? And try to mentally have some sort of answer, right? Because that's how we learn best, right? By or figuring things out ourselves and that sort of thing. Like I can tell you, um, I can teach you everything, right? But in terms of retention and actively remembering what you learned, that is something that you have to do by thinking on your own and also memorizing, right? So this is our first go for this unit. But again, it's nothing too crazy. Should be really, really straightforward. So I guess the first step is to create a blank presentation. Now it says to open PowerPoint, but we already know how to create a blank presentation from there. Now, how would I go about creating a sort of new blank presentation from this page? Let's give everyone 2.5 minutes to do that. Again, if you have it in front of you, if you have PowerPoint open in front of you, try to do it yourself. But even if you don't, try to actively think about it and sort of formulate how to come to a result. So this is the first part. So let's say I want to create a new blank presentation. How would I go about doing that, everyone? Let's give it 2 minutes for everyone to sort of attempt that question. How would we go about doing so, everyone? How would we create a new blank presentation in PowerPoint? How would we go about doing that? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do we think? All right, let's come back, right? So, in terms of creating a blank presentation from this page, if we remember, we mentioned that the new feature is in sort of the File tab by going to the Backstage view, which is true, right? That's the default answer you should be aiming for. We go to File, and we go to new, and then say blank presentation. Or if we are asked to do a template, we choose a template. Another thing we can do, if you remember, is we can add sort of one in the quick access toolbar and click new from there. But generally speaking, if you don't have the new command in your quick access toolbar, again, we go to home and then there will be new here, or we can click on new here and click a new blank presentation. Okay, perfect. That's step one done. Now, we want to add new quick print and spelling to our quick access toolbar. So we want to add those commands to our quick access toolbar. Let's say we constantly are making new slideshows, right? We also need to be able to quick print them for editing, and then we also want spell checks, right? So in sort of business context, we want to do that, right? So now the question ultimately is, how do I go about doing that? And this is a bit of a more, I guess, complex, not complex, but maybe we forgot. So we'll give it 3 minutes for this question since there are multiple components, but how would I go about adding new quick print and spelling to our quick access toolbar, everyone? How would I go about doing so? How would I go about doing so? What do we think? What do we think? What do you think, everyone? How would we go about adding new quick print and spelling? Again, if you have a PowerPoint open in front of you, try to set this up yourself, right? How would we go about doing so? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? What do they think? Okay, let's get back to it. So hopefully, we refer to this arrow here. We go to the arrow, we click on it, new, quick print, and then we're missing spelling. So spelling, and we could do that. Alternatively, if for whatever reason it's not here, which it can be, or in general, like maybe we're looking for another sort of, I guess, another command that is in new save, right? Then again, just as a reminder, we go to more commands, and then we have we switch this to all commands or whichever category. We have a lot, but like all commands. This will open up. We scroll through and sort of select our command we want. Now, let's say I want to deselect them. How do we do it? Well, we click down our quick access toolbar and we deselect them. So let's turn off spelling, and then let's also turn off quick print, and there you go, right? Pretty straightforward in that regard, right? Now we're talking about the tell me bar. I want to insert a shape, right? How would I go about doing so? Now this is a bit of a more softball or easier question. So let's give this roughly a minute 30. But how would I go about inserting a shape from our tell me bar, everyone? How would I go about doing so? How could I do that, everyone? How could I insert sort of a shape from the tell me bar? How could I go about doing so? What do you think? What do you think, everyone? So let's flick back here. Again, tell me bar, straightforward. Let's go shape. Or let's go shapes more specifically. And this opens it up, and let's just select a shape. Let's do a smiley face. And just slap a big smiley face. There we go. Right? Perfect. Now, okay, and here's one. So the ruler, right? Let's say, okay, we have our ruler shown on our screen, which we do. Or theoretically, let's say we don't have the ruler on our screen. How do I enable or disable the ruler, everyone? Do we remember what the set of steps to do that was? This one we'll give it 2 minutes. This is more of a, I guess, like knowledge check question, because it is something that's relatively smaller. But how would we go about doing so, everyone? How could we enable or disable our ruler? How do we go about doing so, everyone? Again, we'll give this 2 minutes, right? But how do we go about enabling or disabling the ruler? Do we remember this? What do we think? What do we think? What do we think, everyone? let's come back, right? Well, if we remember to enable or disable the ruler, we go to view, we can select or deselect, right? And this will enable or disable the ruler. Final question, and this one's really easy. I'll do it really quickly. How do I change my zoom to 120%? Well, here's where zoom tab is located, or zoom command, I guess. And we could simply increase it, right? Or decrease it with the buttons, or we can click and drag if we want a more precise sort of fit, right? But plus minus might work, because especially if you're working in plus or minus increments, right? So that's sort of our let's try section, right? So that's sort of the nature they typically do end up following. Um, Obviously, sort of maybe the difficulty or the rigor of the questions, right? In terms of how maybe tough they are, how involved they are. Um, it will change, right? Questions will get more involved as we move on, right? But this was just a basic example. And again, it's just a tool for reinforcing what we've learned. Um, a very helpful one at that, right? It also gives you the opportunity to sort of think about what we're learning about, right? Because theoretically, I could talk to you for this whole span of 20 hours, right? 20, 22 hours. Um, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're actually going to, I don't know if understands the correct word, but you may not retain the information I'm providing, right? That's why I do these let's try sections, because I find that it pays massive dividends for retention, because let's say in a synchronous context in which I'm hosting a class, it gives students the opportunity to sort of participate and really just think about what they're learning, right? And for you, asynchronously, obviously, I don't have the privilege of interacting with everyone, asking you what sorts of things we can do, right? But I try to replicate that as much as I can, right? And hopefully, just from this little, um, I guess, problem, uh, we do we understand the past, say, 8 slides we've just covered a lot better, right? And we feel a lot more comfortable with it, right? And that's again just the goal of these let's try sections, right? Um, like by the end of this, hopefully you know how to create a new presentation. Um, you know how to sort of add or remove things from the quick access toolbar. You know how to use the tell me bar. You know how to enable or disable the ruler, and you know how to zoom the presentation, right? Hopefully. And if you don't, listen, it's okay, right? If you found that you were struggling, you didn't remember anything, don't worry. We have a long, long road ahead of us. This module is uh, decently sized, so I'm sure you'll pick it up along the way. And again, even if you don't, that's completely fine. With applications like these, oftentimes practice does make perfect, right? And you just need to put a little bit of that effort forward, right? To sort of practice and learn and whatnot, and you'll be completely fine, right? So that was our first let's try section. Moving on.